Hey, it's Mr. Allred, and we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations. In general, quadratic equations can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, and since it's an equation, it has to be equal to something, and this works best for the methods I'm going to show you if it's equal to 0. And honestly, for the first two methods down here, which are factoring and quadratic formula, it's really only useful if we have everything to one side in this form and it's equal to 0. So we are going to look at three methods here: factoring, quadratic formula, and the square root principle. There are other ways to solve a quadratic. You may see instructions that say solve this by factoring or solve this by using a certain method. Technically, if you're getting the answer, it doesn't matter how you solve. Some methods will only work in certain types of forms, and some methods will work in all, but might be a little bit more complicated. So I don't care what methods you use, but you do need to have a variety of methods available. Factoring is going to be useful for so many things, not just this, and quadratic formula is going to work when nothing else works. So those two we have to have. Okay, so let's move ahead. So in this video, I want to focus on method 1 that I gave you, which is factoring. And in here, we're going to say that we're going to talk about the zero factor theorem, which says if we have two things multiplied together, factor 1 and factor 2, I am calling them, factor 1 and factor 2. If those two things are multiplied together to give us 0, so let's ask ourselves that question. If I told you that 5 times some number equals 0, you would say that that number had to be 0, I hope. So down here, when we say two things are multiplied together to give us 0, we can say that we can set the first factor equal to 0, and we can set the second factor equal to 0. And that will give us our two linear equations we hope to solve. Now there could be more factors in other forms, but as far as a quadratic, we probably won't have more than two factors. So coming back to this idea, we spent a good amount of time saying that if we had ax squared plus bx plus c, we talked about a method for factoring that. So if we can factor that on the left hand side, then it will be multiple factors equal to 0, and we can separate that and solve hopefully much simpler equations. Okay, so let's move forward. So here, something's left over down here. Let's get rid of it. Okay, so we've got the example that we're going to work through. It says solve 3p squared minus 2p minus 5 equals 0. So I have everything to one side, so it's already set equal to 0. So if I'm going to factor, let me start off by doing that. So we're going to factor. Now this one I'm going to go through the 5 steps that I gave you in my factoring quadratics method video, which is, first of all, pull anything out that you can, and 3, 2, and negative 5 don't have any common factors, so we can't pull anything out. So A is 3, B is negative 2, and C is negative 5. So that means we need two numbers that multiply together to give us A times C, which is negative 15, and add up to be B, which is, I don't know why I wrote negative 3 there. If you were wondering, it was probably a good question. But B was negative 2, so I apologize for that. I just noticed that. So in this case, you can try a couple of combinations, but I think you need negative 5 and positive 3. So then you can set up your two factors, or at least preliminary. A goes in both, so 3p minus 5 and 3p plus 3. And remember, we ask ourselves, if we put too much in, can we pull anything out? Well, 3 and 5 do not have a common factor, but in the 3p plus 3 I can pull a 3 out. And remember, I throw that away here. So the thing I had on the left hand side factors into 3p minus 5 times p plus 1. So we have broken that apart. Let's move me up to the top. I'm going to ascend way up here. So let's start working on the solving part here. So we had to factor that before we could solve it. So we have broken the 3p squared minus 2p minus 5 down into 3p minus 5 times p plus 1, and that is set equal to 0. So basically that's my two factors that I can separate and write simpler equations for each. So one equation will be 3p minus 5 equals 0. The other one will be p plus 1 equals 0. So if we go back to solving simple linear equations, we need to get p by itself. So in the first one, we'll add 5 divided by 3, but we'll get that p equals 5/3. That's a messy 3. Let me clean it up. Or try to. That's a little bit better. And the other one we'll get p equals -1. So we get two answers out of this. And if you were to take them way back to the beginning, where p is in the quadratic, you should be able to plug 5/3 in and balance out this equation. Both sides will be 0. You should be able to plug the -1 in and balance out the equation. Okay. Alright, here's a second example. I think I'm going to abbreviate the process, but the question is 7x squared plus 53x plus 28 equals 0. So the advantage is everything is on the left and it's equal to 0. I think I'll give you some practice problems where you have to move things around before you start. But it's good to know that if you don't have everything on one side, you can move it. So we'll give you a chance to work on that a little bit later. But we want to factor this thing. So to start off with, we've got our expression here. And we can identify our ABC. A is 7. B is 53, and C is 28, and nothing was coming out of that in step 1. Okay. Step 2, we need two things that multiply together to give us A times C, and I believe 7 times 28 is 196, and they need to add up to be B, which is 53. I did this earlier. You can do it with your calculator, but the two numbers that work are 4 and 49. Use your calculator to find this combination. A little trial and error is okay. But we will put that back together. So put our A in both factors. So 7x plus 4 and 7x plus 49. We put too much in. So let's see if anything comes out. 7 and 4 do not have a common factor. 7 and 49 do. So I'll pull out a 7 and it'll be x plus 7. And remember that 7 I pulled out front goes away. Whew. So the quadratic I started with factors into 7x plus 4 times x plus 7. So basically I took ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, and now I'm writing it as, I'm going to solve it, two things multiplied together, which are 7x plus 4 and x plus 7, and those are multiplied to give me 0. So I've got two factors multiplied to give me 0. So I can set each one equal to 0. So two simple equations. 7x plus 4 equals 0. And x plus 7 equals 0. So I use my solving techniques from the first week in 1.5. But 4 comes over, divided by 7. So I believe in this one x is -4/7. And the other one x is -7. And if you do everything correctly, these answers should work, no matter how weird they come out. Of course, we know everything doesn't factor, so in the next instructional video, we will see another method. Okay. Thank you.